Welcome to the Facilitators Deep Dive Podcast, your podcast on your way to facilitation mastery.
Welcome to another deep dive, and today things are going to get interesting. If you've ever felt like some of your projects are stuck in a rut, or wondered how to breathe new life into a team that's lost its spark, well, you are absolutely in the right place. Today we are going to explore Ecocycle Planning, a method that draws a fascinating parallel between the life cycle of, well, everything, and the activities that we all pour our energy into.
It's truly insightful how Ecocycle Planning helps you visualize where your efforts are at. Are they budding with potential, humming along smoothly, or maybe even clinging to the past? By understanding this cycle, you gain the power to make strategic decisions about resource allocation and identify opportunities for both growth and, believe it or not, intentional destruction.
Intentional destruction. That sounds a little scary. I'm picturing a bulldozer, not exactly a symbol of progress. But I'm guessing it's not as dramatic as it sounds. Our source material for this deep dive is an excerpt from Liberating Structures, which I'm learning is all about breaking free from those rigid, traditional ways of working together. So tell me more about this creative destruction and why it's actually a good thing.
You're right. It's not about actual demolition. Think of it more like a gardener pruning away dead branches to make way for new growth. Ecocycle planning recognizes that sometimes to move forward, we need to let go of things that are no longer serving us, activities that have become stagnant, draining resources without generating any real value. Those are the ones that are ripe for creative destruction.
Okay, I'm starting to see how that could be beneficial, even liberating. But before we get too deep into the destruction phase, let's take a step back and explore this ecocycle. Can you break down the 4 phases for our listener?
Absolutely. Picture a circle representing the life cycle of an activity. It starts with birth. Think of that burst of energy when a new project kicks off. Everyone's brimming with ideas and enthusiasm. It's a time of exploration and experimentation. Then comes maturity, where things are running smoothly, processes are established, and the focus is on efficiency and optimization.
That makes sense. It's like the difference between the excitement of a startup and the well-oiled machine of a mature company. But where does this creative destruction fit in?
That's the crucial turning point. After maturity, we often hit a plateau. And that's where creative destruction comes in. This phase encourages us to critically assess what's working and what's not. It's about consciously letting go of activities that are no longer relevant or effective, even if they were once successful. This opens up space and resources for the final phase, renewal.
Okay, so renewal isn't just about starting something new from scratch.
Exactly. It's about taking the lessons learned from the previous phases, integrating new ideas, and preparing for the next cycle of innovation. It's like composting. You take what's been broken down and use it to nourish new growth.
This is already giving me a new perspective on how to approach projects. It's not just about pushing for constant growth, but also recognizing when it's time to let go and make space for something new to emerge. It's a bit like that saying, sometimes you have to break down to break through.
That's a great way to put it. And one of the things that makes ecocycle planning so effective is that it engages everyone involved in the activity, not just the leaders or experts.
So it's not just a top-down approach.
Not at all. By having everyone participate in the analysis, you tap into a diverse range of perspectives and experiences. This helps identify blind spots, uncover hidden opportunities, and create a shared understanding of the current state of affairs.
This sounds amazing in theory, but how does this dual perspective actually play out in practice? Can you give me an example of how seeing both the micro and macro levels led to a breakthrough?
Imagine a team developing a new product. From a bird's eye view, everything might look great. The project is on schedule, the budget is in check. But when you zoom in and get the ant's eye view, you might discover that one particular feature is causing major headaches for the developers. It's slowing down progress and draining resources.
So it's like those hidden costs that don't show up on the spreadsheets, but are silently sabotaging the project.
Precisely. Ecocycle planning helps surface those hidden issues by giving everyone a voice. In this case, the developers, through their close involvement with the feature, could flag it as being in the maturity phase, even bordering on stagnation. This could lead to a decision to either radically revamp the feature or even scrap it altogether, ultimately benefiting the entire project.
I see your point. It's not just about celebrating what's in the birth phase. It's about recognizing what might be holding everything back. And I guess that's where those structural elements mentioned in the source material come in. They provide a framework for actually putting ecocycle planning into action. So where do we even begin? What's the first step?
It all starts with what the source material calls the structuring invitation. It's about clearly defining the purpose and scope of the eco-cycle exercise. What specific activity, project, or even relationship are you analyzing? This ensures everyone is on the same page from the get-go. And once you've established the why of the exercise, the next step is to consider the how. The source material emphasizes the importance of the physical space and materials. It's not just about sitting around a conference table.
So, ditch the stuffy boardroom, embrace open space.
Exactly. You want a space where people can move around freely, interact with the eco-cycle map, and visually represent their ideas using sticky notes. It's about creating an environment that fosters collaboration and encourages everyone to actively participate.
I'm starting to get a visual, a large room, maybe with a giant eco-cycle diagram on the wall, people buzzing around, brainstorming, sticking notes everywhere. It sounds energizing. But what about those who might be hesitant to speak up in a group setting? How does eco-cycle planning ensure that all voices are heard?
That's where the principle of distributed participation comes in. It's about creating a level playing field where everyone has an equal opportunity to contribute, regardless of their seniority or personality type. This might involve using techniques like silent brainstorming or small group discussions before bringing everyone together for a larger conversation.
That's a good point. Sometimes those quieter voices have the most valuable insights, but they need the right environment to feel comfortable sharing them. And speaking of groups, the source material mentions something about group configuration. What's the ideal setup for eco-cycle planning? Are we talking about working individually, in pairs, or larger teams?
It actually leverages a combination of all three. The process often starts with individual reflection, allowing everyone to gather their thoughts and identify activities related to the chosen topic. Then, participants might pair up to discuss their initial assessments and see if their perspectives align or differ. Finally, these smaller groups come together to share their insights and create a collective eco-cycle map that reflects the wisdom of the entire group.
I'm starting to see how this approach encourages both individual contributions and collaborative thinking.
Yeah.
It's not just about brainstorming in isolation or getting stuck in endless group discussions. It's about finding that sweet spot where individual insights can spark collective understanding.
Precisely. And all of this unfolds within a specific time frame, guided by the sequence of steps and time allocation outlined in the source material. It's not about rushing through the process,
Right.
but rather setting a clear structure that allows sufficient time for each stage of the analysis.
I can already imagine how valuable a skilled facilitator would be in guiding the group through these different steps and making sure everyone stays on track. But I'm also curious, isn't creative destruction a bit risky? What if you accidentally dismantle something essential?
That's a valid concern. The creative destruction phase requires careful consideration and a nuanced understanding of the system you're analyzing. It's not about blindly tearing things down, but rather making informed decisions about what's truly hindering progress and what has the potential to be repurposed or transformed. A skilled facilitator can help the group navigate this phase by asking the right questions, encouraging critical thinking, and ensuring that all potential risks and benefits are thoroughly explored.
So it's more about strategic pruning than reckless demolition. And I imagine that having everyone participate in the process helps mitigate those risks, as you're more likely to catch potential pitfalls if you have multiple sets of eyes on the situation.
Absolutely. It's like having a built-in safety net. The more perspectives you include, the more likely you are to identify potential blind spots and make well-informed decisions about what to keep, what to change, and what to let go of.
This all makes sense in a theoretical context, but I'm also curious about how eco-cycle planning plays out in the real world. The source material mentions several examples, but they feel a bit, brief. Can you give our listener a more in-depth look at how this method has been applied successfully?
Certainly. One example that stands out involved an IT department struggling to manage their service portfolio. They had a whole bunch of services, some thriving, some just chugging along, and others, frankly, on life support. They used Ecocycle Planning to get a clear picture of where each service fell within the cycle.
So instead of activities, they were analyzing services. It's interesting to see how flexible this framework can be.
Exactly. It's adaptable to various situations. What happened with this IT department was pretty remarkable. By placing their services on the Ecocycle map, they discovered that several services were stuck in the maturity phase, draining resources without generating much value.
I can see how that would be a common problem. You get comfortable with a service that's been working well for a while, but you don't always stop to ask if it's still the best solution, or if it's holding you back from innovating in other areas.
You hit the nail on the head. And that's what this IT department realized. Through Ecocycle Planning, they had a framework to make some tough decisions. They decided to phase out those stagnant services and reinvest those resources into developing new services that were better aligned with their current needs and strategic goals.
So the creative destruction phase wasn't about punishing anyone or dismantling essential services. It was about making strategic choices to optimize their resources and create space for innovation. What was the outcome of this process?
It was incredibly positive. By letting go of those outdated services, they freed up not just financial resources, but also their team's time and energy to focus on developing cutting-edge solutions. It led to a surge in innovation, improved customer satisfaction, and ultimately a more agile and responsive IT department.
That's a great example of how eco-cycle planning can lead to tangible results. It's not just a feel-good exercise. It's about driving real change and achieving organizational goals. But I'm also curious, you mentioned that this approach can even be applied to personal growth. How would that work?
That's one of the things I find most fascinating about eco-cycle planning. Its versatility. You can apply it to almost any aspect of your life. Imagine using it to analyze your personal goals, your habits, even your relationships.
You've got me thinking. I've been struggling with feeling stuck in a creative rut lately. I wonder if eco-cycle planning could help me shed some light on that.
It's interesting to think about applying those phases, birth, maturity, creative destruction, renewal, to my creative process.
It might be incredibly insightful. For instance, have you been clinging to certain creative habits or techniques that, while comfortable, may no longer be serving your artistic growth? Perhaps there's an element of creative destruction needed to shake things up and make space for new inspiration and approaches. That's a really thought-provoking way to look at it. Instead of just trying to force myself to be more creative, maybe I need to first examine what I need to let go of. What outdated beliefs or habits might be blocking my creative flow? It's almost like applying the principles of decluttering to my creative process.
It's a wonderful analogy. And that's the beauty of eco-cycle planning. It offers a framework for examining any system or process, whether it's a large organization, a team project, or even your own personal development.
This has been incredibly insightful. We've talked about the phases, the structural elements, the potential risks and benefits, and even real-world examples. What are some key takeaways you'd like to emphasize for our listeners as we wrap up this part of our deep dive?
I think the most important takeaway is that eco-cycle planning isn't a one-time assessment. It's a powerful tool for ongoing reflection and adaptation. Just like the cycle itself, it's a continuous process of evaluation, adjustment, and renewal.
So it's not about creating a static snapshot of where things are at and then filing it away.
Exactly. It's about integrating eco-cycle planning into your regular decision-making process, whether you're managing a project, leading a team, or even reflecting on your personal goals. The eco-cycle provides a valuable framework for understanding where your efforts are within the cycle and what actions might be needed to move forward effectively.
It sounds like this approach could be especially helpful in navigating those inevitable moments of change and transition that we all experience both professionally and personally. If we understand that those transitions are a natural part of the cycle, we might be less resistant to them and more open to the opportunities they present.
That's such a powerful insight. Instead of fearing creative destruction, we can embrace it as a necessary catalyst for growth and innovation. It's about recognizing that endings are not failures. They are simply opportunities for new beginnings.
This whole conversation has really shifted my perspective. I'm starting to see how eco-cycle planning could be a valuable tool for cultivating a mindset of continuous improvement, not just in a work context, but in all areas of life.
I completely agree. It encourages a proactive approach to change, inviting us to constantly assess what's working, what's not, and what adjustments we can make to stay aligned with our goals and values.
I'm curious, what advice would you give to our listeners who are eager to start applying eco-cycle planning to their own lives and work? Where's the good place to start?
The beauty of this method is that you can start small. You don't need to tackle a massive project or organizational overhaul right away. Choose one area where you feel stuck or where you see potential for improvement. It could be a personal goal you've been struggling with, a project that's lost momentum, or even a relationship that needs a little revitalization.
So pick a specific area and then apply those 4 phases: birth, maturity, creative destruction, and renewal.
Exactly. Ask yourself, where does this activity or goal fall within the eco-cycle? Is it in its infancy, full of potential but needing careful nurturing? Is it humming along smoothly but maybe becoming a bit complacent? Or is it clinging to the past, draining energy without generating much value?
And once you've identified where things are on the cycle, You can start brainstorming actions based on the principles of ecocycle planning.
Precisely. If something is stuck in the maturity phase and needs a jolt of energy, what can you do to introduce an element of creative destruction? What needs to be pruned back, let go of, or completely reimagined? And conversely, if something is in the renewal phase, how can you connect the dots, integrate lessons learned, and prepare for a new cycle of growth?
It's like having a roadmap for navigating change and growth, not just reacting to it. I'm already feeling inspired to go through my to-do list and see what needs a little ecocycle analysis. But before I get too carried away, are there any common pitfalls that we should be aware of when applying this method? What are some of the traps we might fall into?
One common trap is thinking that creative destruction is only about getting rid of things. It can also be about transforming existing activities or resources. Don't be afraid to get creative and think about how you can repurpose or reimagine what you already have.
So it's not always about starting from scratch, but rather about seeing the potential for renewal within what already exists.
Exactly. Another trap is getting so focused on the birth phase, with all its excitement and potential, that you neglect the importance of the other phases. Remember, all 4 phases are essential for long-term success.
It's like planting a garden and only focusing on the seeds. You need to tend to the soil, nurture the seedlings, and even prune back some growth to allow the healthiest plants to flourish.
That's a perfect analogy. And one final trap to avoid is thinking that ecocycle planning is a solo endeavor. It's most effective when it's a collaborative process, involving all stakeholders and tapping into a diversity of perspectives.
This has been such a fascinating and insightful deep dive into ecocycle planning. It's definitely given me a new framework for thinking about how I approach projects, goals, and even my creative process.
It's been a pleasure exploring this topic with you, and I encourage our listeners to take what they've learned and experiment with ecocycle planning in their own lives. I have a feeling you'll be amazed by the results.
As we wrap up this deep dive, we'd love to hear your thoughts. What resonated with you? What are you excited to try out? Share your insights and experiences with us, and let's keep this conversation going. Until next time, happy cycling.
See you next time on the Facilitators Deep Dive Podcast, your podcast on your way to facilitation mastery. Until next time.
See you then.